Welcome to Parkside at 175, a podcast that testifies to the faithfulness of God. By looking back at His faithfulness, we're inspired to move forward for His kingdom. I'm your host, Justin Cook, and it's my great joy to serve as the lead pastor at Parkside. This episode is called Missions, and I'm joined by a group of people who've been involved in Parkside's missions efforts for many years. Jim Keim, Ed Ferguson, and Rob and Lynn Wachter. Jim, Rob, and Ed all served together at Parkside on the missions committee, and we'll kind of walk through some brief introductions here. Jim served on the committee for decades. And Jim, I just want you to know, and you already know this, but you have been a mentor to me and an incredible example of faithful generosity and what it means to be a wonderful sender of missionaries. And brother, I want to say thank you for that example and for joining us today. We're glad you're here. Ed also served on the committee for decades, and Ed loves missions and does an amazing job of caring for missionaries and seeing practical things that they need but don't necessarily want to ask for or maybe even think about. And Ed, I love your example of making a Saturday morning habit of reading prayer letters for missionaries so you know their needs and can be there to support them in whatever ways are needed and helpful. Thank you for your example and for being here as well, my friend. And Rob also served on the missions committee for years. And about 6 years ago, God moved in Rob and Lynn's life to send them to southern Brazil as missionaries after careers here in Indianapolis as scientists. And so Rob and Lynn, to each of you, Emily and I have been incredibly blessed to be in your lives and to transition the phases of our relationships through the years of friendship with your kids to serving as a teacher of high school students of your kids, and then even now just as friends and co-laborers in the gospel. It's been a joy to kind of be on that journey together, and your example in your life to us has been just a sweet story of being willing to let God rewrite the script in ways that may not be expected by others, but by being willing to move away from home and spend a portion of your retirement years serving internationally where the Lord would open doors. So thank you for your example, for your friendship, and for being here with us today. You're in person. You're not having to be on the other side of the pond here.
No, we're so thankful to be here, and by God's grace, He's opened the door for us to have a second kind of career in southern Brazil. So we're blessed, and thank you so much. It's been a real blessing to be part of Parkside and then this podcast.
Yeah. Lynn, we're glad to have you here as well.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. So I'm super excited. I've been looking forward to this conversation for a while to get as many people as possible in the room. And to try and do that was quite a task. But I know schedule-wise it's been a little tricky. Thanks for making the best accommodations you can. I've told the listeners a little bit about each of you, but maybe we could open up here with you telling us just a bit more about yourself, and specifically how you first got involved with missions at Parkside and how that role has morphed and changed and what it's looked like over the years. Jim, could I ask you to lead out and just kind of go first in introducing yourself to our listeners there?
Sure. uh, During my early days at Parkside, I was involved in the Sunday school class and was active there. And through the Sunday school class and discussions, it became understood that I really liked missions. It was later that my Sunday school teacher, a deacon, asked if I'd be willing to serve on the missions committee. The roles have really changed over the years.
Jim, timeline-wise, when would that have been roughly?
That would have been somewhere maybe early 80s.
Okay.
When that happened. And so during that timeline, Pastor Tyler led the meetings that we would have. They would generally be quick meetings. After a Sunday night service or a Wednesday night service, he'd gather the missions committee together briefly and discuss an urgent item. The formal meetings came later. They were quarterly. Dr. Thomas Walker, a veteran missionary, was the chair, and I learned a lot through being with him and going through the meetings and hearing his heart for missions. So that was a joy to serve in those days. Not to say it wasn't a joy in later years, but it was certainly a joy then.
Yeah.
In those days, we operated a bit different, and the missions funds would grow, and sometimes we had the joy of just meeting together to decide how we're going to disperse these extra funds that had accumulated in missions. So we were able to meet some needs that way. It was
Yeah.
great.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Rob and Lynn, you want to hop in next and just kind of talk about your early involvement and how you got integrated into the missions program here at Parkside?
Sure. I mean, we Lynn and I really didn't have a church home, but after we got married, we wanted to find a church, and Lynn heard Pastor Tyler on the radio, Thoughts for Today, so we came and checked it out. I got saved really in '91, and after that, it's my heart really had a burden for the lost. So we started.
That was while you were at Purdue?
That was here.
Oh, here.
Yeah, we became members in '91 here. So after we joined, we took lifestyle evangelism. We were active in the church, is what I was getting at. We were active in the church, and through the Living Christmas Tree, I met Pastor Carl Prokop, met Ed, and over time, I got invited to be on the missions committee as well. And so that was really my introduction. I mean, prior to that, I didn't know what a missionary was. I don't think. How did you become a missionary? Who were these people called missionaries? So, in serving on that committee, got to know a lot of the missionaries that Bethesda, now Parkside, supported.
Yeah.
So that was my really introduction.
And Lynn, tell that same story from your perspective.
Mine's a little different. I grew up in South America, and I was saved at a youth retreat in Bogota, Colombia. So I know Spanish. I knew a lot of missionaries. My parents were not missionaries, but I knew a lot of missionaries, missionary kids growing up. And I always I thought when grad school got difficult, I thought, I'm just going to join the Peace Corps. I can't do this anymore. So I always wanted to be a missionary. But in terms of Parkside, Parkside had such an emphasis. I was always so excited when a missionary would come and speak. That was the first thing I wanted to do, was come and hear them. We had missions conferences, and you could sign up to take missionaries for meals or come over to your house. So I always wanted to have somebody come over and have a meal and get to know them more about so Rob and I together, we got to know a lot of missionaries that way through the committee and through those conferences.
Yeah, and that started at a young age, the interest, and then just carried on.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Ed, catch our listeners up to speed here. What was your involvement from an early standpoint in missions?
So my involvement in missions is kind of you can see God's hand in your life, but at the time things are going on, it's kind of serendipity. You think, oh, yeah, I'll do this or this will happen. My introduction to coming to Parkside and everything changed my life. And that started out as a serendipitous moment of me just driving down the interstate and seeing a sign out there that said, "We care, come and see." I was being on a job transfer, and I was being sent to Indiana. Had no coworkers, no friends, no nothing. So I think, well, I go to this church and get connected or whatever. I ran into a guy on the parking lot, another serendipitous moment. His name was John Carver. And he told me to get out of the car, and he, that's an hour story in itself.
And this is 1991?
Early 90s, 92 maybe, something,
Okay.
91, 92, something like that. He invites me to come in, and 2 hours later, I walk out and I'm at church. So that's kind of how the whole thing started. I had a extreme interest in missions. A guy named Jack Craig, who was on the missions committee, was in charge of a missions conference one day, and he asked him and his wife, we knew them through the church here, they asked us to help set up for a banquet. And that's how kind of the whole thing with me being on the missions committee and all that started. So that would have been the late 90s when I started setting up the banquet, mid to late 90s. And that was just the beginning of my involvement in missions here.
I love kind of these threads you're each tying together that at the moment, whether it's Lynn as a as a young girl in South America, or the men here, somebody is extending this invitation to a youth camp, youth retreat there in Bogota, or someone saying, hey, here's a step you could take in your discipleship, join in this committee, and you can help to serve these missionaries, and you maybe didn't know a whole lot of what it was. Jim, you referenced a deacon inviting you, but it's somebody seeing a newer person and a younger person and saying, yes, let's invest in that person, give them an opportunity. And you guys look back now, 20, 30, 40 years later and say that was really, really significant in my discipleship.
It was
Jesus.
providence, but at the time you think, oh, it's just like happening, right?
Yeah, exactly. That's great.
I think at the time too, around the early '90s, there was Bethesda then had a pretty strong discipleship program, and so as we came in, we took the lifestyle evangelism class. We were into 7, and so there was surveys we filled out to figure out what our gifts were, and so we had our personal interests, but also the interests that these surveys would indicate, and we said, well, we can serve the Lord in these capacities, and that just moved us along and gravitated to us into a missions service type. So.
Yeah, that's good. So you guys have each had unique seats in seeing Parkside invest pretty sizable amounts of resources. Funding is a big part of that, but it's not the only part of it. The sizable resource investment in missions through the years has a way of shaping a church itself. There's work overseas that's taking place, but I wonder if you wouldn't reflect for just a bit on how that has shaped Parkside itself in making that commitment and sustaining that commitment. How have you observed that shaping the life of the church here?
I think that what I've seen is that when a church gives their resources, whether it's financial, whether it's backpacks and diapers, or whether it's actual people that are from the congregation, I think that the church becomes a more compassionate church, a more prayerful church. Certainly, there's joy in seeing things happen on the mission field, and I just think it really has that culture change for the church, and you're really outward focused. You're not inwardly focused on how can we, improve this or that or whatever. You're more concerned about the relationships and those redemptive conversations you can have out in the community. So I think it makes the church look outward as opposed to inward, and it's very healthy, I think.
I think that I was actually thinking about this yesterday as I was traveling. Being on mission, and I'm not talking about missions, I'm talking about being on mission.
Like every Christian called to be on mission.
Yes, for the gospel. And so, where your treasure is, there is your heart also. So that ties into money, but it also ties into time and just being on mission and looking for those opportunities is I think it helps the church. There's a lot of good things you can get involved in, drilling water wells and clothing people, but I think the thing I appreciate about Parkside is that we've made an effort to be on mission. We do those things. We drill, we supply water and medical care and things like that, but that's not our main focus. And so I think that helps the church to not just be good people, but to be on mission for the Lord.
Yeah, the gospel requires words, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so as we're sending missionaries and investing in that, it keeps it, to Rob's point, front and center. So we must be outward focused and not insular. And to your point, it's not just a social club or try and do some philanthropic, good things, but say, no, there's a real Jesus who came and lived a real life, and there is a real gospel of his life, death, resurrection, and transforming power that must be proclaimed. And it keeps that on, right at the forefront right there. That's really good. One of the other things, you were talking about investing resources, but Parkside has sent a lot of their own members as career missionaries. I mean, Ed, your son and daughter-in-law, Rob and Lynn, your son is getting ready to leave in less than 2 months, 1 month, less than 1 month maybe.
Middle of January, yeah.
Yeah, it's coming right up. which by the time this releases, he'll be on the field. And, you know, Jim, you've seen a whole host of these in your own family, been involved in various ways as well. As Parkside is sending her own members out, um, maybe think specifically on that element. How has that impacted you? How has that impacted the church? Not just broadly to be, missionally aware and investing in missions and that sort of thing, but actually be sending our own people. How has that impacted the church?
Well, while I was serving on a committee, I really observed firsthand how the Lord pulls people, directs people into having a heart for missions and being willing to go and serve themselves. And you mentioned our early couples from the church, even your mom and dad. They were on staff here, but I observed the transition from being a staff pastor to being called into missions, Jim and Susan Cook. And obviously, being on a committee and hearing discussions about how the Lord is calling, it really, at times when you could see the Lord at work in it, they just brought tears of joy to my heart to see how a person's mind is changing, and it's just great. Um, Phil and Jan Smith were both serving on the committee at that time, and independently, how they began talking and then sharing with us how the Lord was calling them. So I think there was a blessing there in serving on the committee that perhaps didn't get shared in a wider venue to the church body as a whole. But it's just great. It really pulls you into missions is people going. Missions is people giving. It's a group effort.
Yeah, I like what you're saying there, Jim, that we sometimes talk in terms of senders and goers. And there sometimes is this idea that the goers are the people that are really committed. And certainly they are very committed. I'm not down on that. But when we send our own and say, those are our people over there, it's not just this abstraction of missionaries. Like, no, that is Rob and Lynn. That's Eddie and Sarah. That's Ben and Maria. That's Phil and Jan. That's, the list goes on. It drives a deeper ownership within those are our people. And there's a sacrificial commitment we are committing to send well. It was William Carey who I think said to his sending church some 300-400 years ago, I will go into the abyss if you'll hold the rope. And it takes people who have got a firm grip on that rope as you go to say, I will support you well from where I'm at here. You guys have served and seen God do amazing things in various ways. Do you have a favorite story as you reflect on just kind of the various things you've heard about, seen yourself testified to in missions? Like, boy, I would love for our listeners to hear this story of how God was at work or did something incredible. Anything come to mind there?
I could just do something recently that really was interesting. God is at work in the joy times and in the not so joyful times. And so in southern Brazil, we recently had catastrophic flooding. 100 people died. 600,000 were displaced from their homes. Thousands lost everything. And that can be a horrible time, but God really opened the doors for churches in the area in southern Brazil to really help and assist and provide not only clothing and food and furniture, but counseling, biblical counseling. So right now, right at the edge of the water line, right at the edge of the water line where the water stopped in São Leopoldo, there's a building that's called the Oak Leaf Project, and it's going up, and so people are God's using people there to serve as a food and distribution center for people in that community. And before, if you had put a building right there, not on the edge of anything you'd really think of, it really wouldn't have had the same impact. But when people have a need, and when God's people are meeting the need of people, it opens so many doors for you to have great conversations. And you move from a social conversation to a redemptive conversation, right? Mm-hmm. So not just how's the weather and, how are you doing today, but you can move into those deeper spiritual conversations. So God has really opened that door wide and he continues to do that. So, God uses catastrophes and persecutions to spread his people out and reach more and more people. And so sometimes we look at that as thinking, no, why did this happen, God? And God says, yeah, it happened, and now take advantage of it. Okay, people are open to the gospel. They're open to your conversations.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, that's Acts 8, the greatest missionary movement in the history of the world. Started with persecution that caused everyone except the apostles to disperse.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think we saw that with COVID as well.
Okay, so that's a fascinating lead-in, right? Everyone talks about all the terrible parts of COVID. How did you see God use COVID for his glory, Len?
It's almost similar to the flood. There were a group of Venezuelans that had arrived in Dos Hermanos, which is where we were planning our church, and a month later they were without jobs. So they had arrived planning to work, and then they had no jobs. So they needed everything. And several of those families are now members of our church because of the outreach and the love and the care that they saw during COVID. And now they're members of our church.
And were it not for COVID, who knows how
Exactly.
that would have played out.
We might not never have met them.
Yeah. Praise the Lord.
I was kind of thinking about a funny story.
Okay, give us some levity here, Ed.
And the topic is Randy Richner, and he's a Brazilian missionary, and anytime you talk about him, there's always going to be a funny story, right? He'd met him and his wife had met this woman, and they started discipling her, and she became saved. And I hope I get the story right, but I'll get the gist of it. She became saved, and her husband was just a vile man, an evil alcoholic, and was really not a very good person. And he would stand outside the church while Randy was preaching, yelling, "I'm going to kill you." And, just all kinds of mean things and yelling. So much so that Randy called back to the States and asked for special prayer for this man and for his own life, actually, because he really felt like this guy could do this. And, through time, he just kept working with the man and talking, didn't have him arrested or anything like that, just kept working with the man. And, that guy eventually came to Christ.
Wow.
And Randy had the privilege of baptizing him at the church, and they at the baptismal, the guy was in the tank, and he said, give your testimony, and this guy said, well, Pastor Randy, I've caused you a lot of grief down through the time, and I know I threatened to kill you, and you're getting ready to plunge me under the water, and I just want you to realize that I'm now a believer. Don't hold me under too long. So the guy was like, don't drown me in the baptismal tank.
That's hilarious. And Randy, I love too, has been faithfully serving the Lord, but it's a totally down to earth guy as well. I remember he was back on furlough one time, and we were playing golf, and he hit a bad shot, and he told me this story. One of the other guys he'd played golf with at another supporting church, whenever they hit a bad shot, they said, "Oh no, not where the missionaries go." And so that's just kind of become our joke, is if we're playing golf and one of us hits a bad shot, I go, "Oh no, that's where the missionaries go." Jim, do you have any stories of just seeing God work? Maybe not on the golf course per se, but one that would stick out above the rest for you?
Well, I certainly can, and I got to limit myself. I want to tell you about a family member of mine, and that's in missions. He's the second generation now in missions. And back about, 6 years ago, something like that, they were in a hard to reach area, in a jungle type area, and they were explaining who God is, and through this whole process, they gathered a group together. And interesting enough, they had Wi-Fi. The government had put Wi-Fi in. And so I began getting updates, sometimes daily, certainly more than twice a week. I would get this email update as who to pray for, what's going on, and to see God work from a people that couldn't read or write And to see God work in that, oh, I mean, every letter I was in tears and just gratitude to seeing God work.
Hmm.
And I encourage them, put that in a book. Get it out, get that story out, because a church is planted there now. There are souls saved. And even without the missionary, they were forced to leave. Even without the missionary, the Holy Spirit is directing that body, believers. And it's such a wonderful thing to see God at work, totally at work, with very little part on the man's side. No money involved, that type of thing. There was money to get the missionary there, but they're doing it on their own through the direction of the Holy Spirit.
Well, it's
What a joy that is.
yeah, and it's so important for us to remember those things, brother, because there are times when we see difficulties in our own lives, challenges to the advance of the gospel, and to pull on the rich history of God's faithfulness in the past gives me inspiration and confidence to press forward in His name and for His kingdom today, knowing He will continue to work even when it doesn't maybe look the best for me right now.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Let me send this a little bit different direction here. Ed, your son is serving in foreign missions. You would talk a little bit about what it's been like to send your own son, and what that has meant, and how that's maybe changed your thinking, if it has at all.
Mm-hmm. So I have a unique perspective in that I sent the church sent our son as a single person at first, and he went to Mexico and in Costa Rica. And then he came back here and served as a pastor here at the church for 6 or 7 years, something like that.
Yep.
Then this is where it's completely different. Is he gets married and he has 3 of my grandchildren, and the Lord calls him to Costa Rica. That is a completely different story than sending your single son off. Yeah. It's completely different. So, when I sent my single son off, or his mother and I, when we go to the airport, his mom cried, and I patted him on the back and said, be strong, son, do the Lord's work. It's different, right?
Yeah.
So, we got back in the car, and I was, you get the point of what I'm saying here is that we get back in the car, and his mom's in tears, and I'm more concentrated on comforting her than myself. Then you fast forward that after 7 years, and he comes back to you and tells you that the Lord's calling him to Costa Rica, and he's got a wife and 3 kids at that time. That's where that hurts, and that's hard. But I can tell you that if you believe in the mission, that not talking about missions, I'm talking about the mission that we talked about earlier. If you truly believe in the mission, then you know that they're in God's hands, and He will be faithful to them. And also, if you believe in the mission, you're excited about the mission, right? If you're a member of a social club like we talked about early, the mission's not as important to you. So I would say that really helps. Now, yesterday, I was in Costa Rica, and my grandkids hugged me tight and cried. Our oldest didn't want to let go of me. Didn't want to let go of Grandma. That I believe in the mission, and my wife believes in the mission, and we're on mission. But we have emotions, and it's that part is difficult. But God is faithful. He's allowed me to be at a time in my life where I don't have to work anymore as far as a regular job, and He provides the finances for us to go see them and be involved in the work there in Costa Rica. So I don't know if that answered your question, Justin.
Well, it does, because there's these glorious realities we're speaking of. We get to partner in these ways for the mission of God. And yet there's some really hard realities as well. And you're speaking to these, right? When the grandkids are grabbing you by the leg and Grandpa, don't go. And you do have to go. And, I've heard it said we put our yes on the table and we let God put it on the map. Because you believe in the mission, and we are not our own, and we belong to the Lord, and He sends them out, and it requires a sacrificial commitment to go, but it also requires a sacrificial commitment to send well, and you need both. Rob and Lynn, if I can direct this part of the conversation towards you guys, you've uniquely sat as both sender and goer, right? You've had both of those roles over the years. How has that shaped your thinking of things you saw more clearly or uniquely as a sender, things you maybe see more clearly or uniquely now as a goer, and just kind of take us through that journey of your life over these last number of years?
Well, it's interesting, because I think the first people that we saw go that we were really closer friends with was Jen and Phil Smith, right? And we worked with them on the missions committee, and we became good friends with them. And I remember loading him up in the parking lot here at Parkside and seeing him off, and that really had an impact on me. That wow, he is really leaving, And we're sending him. We're praying for him. We're helping meet his needs. And then, it turns out that we actually went as well. Oh. So, but we didn't want to get in God's way. We didn't want to get in the way of the Holy Spirit and not say, Lord, we're willing to go. We are willing to go, Lord. We're willing to be obedient and faithful to your calling. Mm-hmm. And now, Ben and Maria are going to be going. And for me, it's not so much that we're sending them, as they're answering God's call in their life.
Yeah.
And we definitely didn't want to quench the Holy Spirit and say anything that would deter them following the Lord. Mm-hmm. That's the most important thing, right? Like, to agree with Ed, what Ed said, we agree with the mission. The mission is to seek and save the lost, right? Those that are misinformed or uninformed, unchurched, we want to reach those in whatever capacity we can with the talents God's given us. Mm-hmm. So for us, it's almost like we're letting go. Yeah. We're letting go to Ben and Maria and our 3 grandkids, same as what Ed has, right? And so that's really a bittersweet, because we're happy that they're serving the Lord, right? I mean, they can serve the Lord here, they can serve the Lord wherever, but it's really about letting go. And I was talking to a couple the other day, and they said their kid was 16 years old. I go, 16? I said, what grade is that? Is that 10 or 11th grade? Yeah. And I said, well, 11th grade is where you start letting go, right? Because by 12th grade, they've got their own things they're doing. They're involved in sports, and they're doing this. They got their license, and they're going. It's all about a process of training them when they're younger, but then releasing them to God's call. And that's what I think is... We're in the process of doing that, right? Because they're going to be leaving in a few weeks. So.
And it's a lifetime of process of just deepening surrender to Christ, letting go. Right now, it's of your son, right, and your daughter-in-law, and your grandkids.
Before that, it was us. It's like, letting go of stuff here, right? Mm-hmm. The security that's here, the house that we had here, the friends we had here. It really is. We're still on an adventure. Right, we're not in the last chapter of our book. Yeah. Right. I don't think. Maybe only God knows that, but we're still processing it.
Yeah. So. Lynn, how would you think about that question?
It's a couple of different things. One is having been here at Parkside and seeing people go. There's a lot of comfort in knowing that the church is behind them and watching the process. So when we were going to go through it, we kind of already knew what the process was going to be. And there's a lot of comfort in that, knowing that the church is behind us, and also where we were going, that there's a good relationship with the people down there. So I would say people who are seeing what Ben and Maria are going through right now, there's going to be a group of people coming to follow who have watched that, and they're going to be comfortable in knowing that the church sends in a certain way, and they can get behind it. But in terms of personally, Ben had gone to China first as a single, So when he said, "Oh, I might be a missionary in Germany," I was like, "Oh, okay, yeah." But when my daughter wants to go 2 months in the jungle in Brazil, that was hard.
So we haven't talked about Leah on here yet. Give the listeners kind of a little bit of the backstory, and then get into that part of the narrative.
So our daughter is the youngest, the baby, and she's very interested in missions as well. And
She's 24 now, so not really
she's
so
not
much
a
a
baby.
baby anymore. But
So she is interested in linguistics and literacy, and she wanted to do a 2-month internship in literally in the jungle in Brazil, living in a hut and bathing in a river and doing her laundry in a river. And I was like,
sleeping in a hammock with mosquito netting all over.
Yeah, when they say in the bush,
In the
Leah was
bush,
in the
yeah.
bush.
So although I admire her greatly for doing that, that was a little hard to let go and let her go do that, especially because it was completely in Portuguese.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, so there's very real challenges along the way. You're saying, yes, it's worth it. Let's do this. This is what the Lord is calling us to. But I think it's important to count the cost, right? To recognize the cost of discipleship. And we're not just, charging ahead as a bunch of cowboy cavaliers without recognizing, yeah, there's real difficulty and real loss involved.
And that's
we just
why
think it's worth it.
Right, it's worth it. And that's why it's so important to have a supporting church, a sending church that have prayer warriors that are praying, daily, weekly, that are helping meet the needs of the missionaries that are there. It can be a lonely place, and as missionaries learning a language, it's difficult to learn the language. I just want to let you know. Okay, it's difficult. God somehow blinded me from that necessity, right? When we were talking about should we go or not, we think, yeah, we'll go down, and like we were going to go help Randy and Cindy for a couple of years. Now it's been, how many years has it been? So
almost 6.
Six years. So, but it helps to have people that are praying for you and supporting you, and looking out for you, because sometimes, you always need that, and sometimes you're not thinking about that when you're actually on the field.
Yeah.
You're trying to do different things, but it's helpful to have that church.
For sure.
Yeah. Could I just back up to something Rob
absolutely.
talked about? Is one of the things that brings you comfort and that I appreciate about Parkside and the missions committee that they've done down through the years is the church tends to see a missionary, they come forward and they're going on the field. The church just seen that. The missions committee and the leadership of the church, it's on paper, on purpose. We always say in the business world, it was like, so everything is laid out well for if somebody is sent from our church. And so if you've gone through the process of being sent by Parkside, it's not willy-nilly, and it's not there's probably spent maybe 2 years or at least a year in the process of are you doing missions here at home? There's a complete evaluation. So Rob just kind of brushed by that briefly, but I wanted to circle back and point out that's the importance of a missions committee here at church and the leadership of the church and being purposeful in our mission.
Yeah, that's good. Jim, I want to come to you in just a moment. I have one more question I wanted to ask Rob and Lynn here. Your education was not Bible college seminary. You're working professionally, secular job here in Indy, and then second careers in missions. There may be people listening who didn't go to Bible college, didn't go to seminary. Maybe missions as second career or something in retirement has not been on their radar. Maybe they have thought about it a little bit. What would you say to people who might be in that boat, that they care about the advance of the gospel, but their career track has not been, we're going to go into missions from age 20 and it's clear moving on forward? Anything you would say to people who might be listening that maybe their career track is closer to yours, an encouragement or a challenge? What would you say? Maybe, Lynn, you want to kick us off there?
Sure. Boy, God can use anybody, and if He's calling you, we are scientists, but we are the ones doing all kinds of things at the church. So I think you don't have to have a seminary degree to go, but you do need a lot of Bible knowledge. So I would encourage those people to study the Bible
And you studied so well while you were here that by the time you had been discipled well, you were discipling others, you had learned and studied the Bible, that even without that degree, it's not as if you
Right.
were passively involved in your local church before being sent.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And Parkside invested in our training before we left.
Yeah. Rob, anything you would say to folks of a similar
Yeah, I would say
direction?
if you agree with the mission, right, to seek and save the lost, I would encourage you to pray about how God could use you strategically, right? How can God use my skills? And maybe that's locally, right? Maybe you need to, or maybe you are, you care about reaching people locally. You're involved in outreaches. Maybe you know the names of the people that you go into restaurants and you personally are getting to know them. Maybe you're involved in I don't know, a number of activities you could be involved in. But I would encourage you to be praying about how God could use you, especially as maybe you've got a non church degree, or you're a scientist and engineer.
Mm-hmm.
God can use all those types of people. He uses availability more than ability. Okay, if you're motivated and you're available, God can use that. But even if you have the greatest ability, but you're not available, what good is that? It's not so much. So I would really encourage people to if there is that interest, if you agree with the mission, right, to reach and seek and save the lost, then get active where you are right now. Get active at Parkside. Look at how you can help. Look at how you can invite people to any sort of activity. That's what you're doing on the field, right? And don't get the idea that travel will make you into a missionary, right? If you need to be active now and gaining your biblical knowledge, Lynn and I did Bible Study Fellowship. We took a year of training here with the pastors through the Bible, and we've been to Faith in Lafayette for biblical counseling. So while we were here, we did a lot of that training. So I would say, don't let your lack of a Bible degree get in your way.
Yeah.
I really encourage you to just become active now and see how God can use you, and get to know the missionaries. There's a missionary wall. At least there used to be. I didn't look over to the right side of the church, but get to know your missionaries. Now, I got to know, and Ed got to know missionaries, and Jim did too, because they would come in and report, right? And so we got to know them as well and know the team, and then God just led one thing to another. That, boy, we'd really like to. We got to know the missionaries, and we thought we'd really like to go help.
Yeah.
We know there's challenges and everything, but we thought we could help them, and that's what we did.
Yeah. Jim, you and I have talked many times about the importance of investing in missions and that being handed off to the next generation, and they be compelled to invest their time, talent, treasure in rich ways. I think we have some younger listeners tuning in to hear some of the history and the ways God has worked. What would you say, particularly to our younger listeners, about investing in missions and the work of the gospel?
Well, I think to understand that, I want to back up a bit in my own life, and that is that I was in a home where my dad would lead us in prayer before the evening meal. And in that prayer, he would pray for a specific missionary and that missionary's need. And that went on for years. And that began in my early teens. It was later in that time that at a church camp meeting on missions that I surrendered to go and be used as the Lord would have him use me. And that meant then being associated with missionaries, get to know them. And in my young married life, we began having missionaries over for a meal as they would visit. Some stayed over in our home. And little by little, you get drawn. You get drawn to understanding missions. And initially, it was certainly foreign to my wife, but it wasn't to me because I'd seen it in my parents. We began to participate financially. in helping a missionary. And we soon learned that we weren't going without. God was providing. God was giving us even more to share. And so I would encourage families to develop relationships with missionaries and pray for that missionary and ask for prayer letters from them. I have learned so much from reading prayer letters from missionaries and getting closer to them. And when I do see them physically, ask about something that I read in those prayer letters. You feel a part of it. And that's such an encouragement. And that's to young families. I mean, you can do that as a young family.
Yeah. Well, on that topic, but before you keep going there, missionary prayer letters are critical to read. Missionary biography is also huge. Do you have one or two missionary biographies you would encourage someone to look at? That's to Jim or anyone else in the room. I don't want to interrupt your train of thought too much there, but while we're on that, it's a key way to learn and grow.
John G. Patton is a really good one.
Yeah, John G. Patton. There's his full autobiography is quite long.
Yeah, it's just a little long, but
there's a newer one that's out that's like 130 pages.
Uh-huh.
Okay. And it's not it's kind of a mashup of his stuff. It's very easy to read. We're giving it to middle school and high school kids.
Excellent.
Yeah, maybe one more before we come back to Jim to continue his train of thought. Missionary biography, top of your list.
Rob took mine.
Rob took yours. Okay. Jim, do you have a favorite one?
I guess mine are real life people. So
yeah,
I haven't. I kind of got acquainted. That's where it's at, and it's the Lord certainly directing me.
Yeah.
In getting to know them, in hearing, listening.
Yeah. Well, keep going on your charge into the next generation on investing in missions. What would you tell them?
Well, certainly, as I think I mentioned, pray for that missionary. Send them encouraging notes. Sometimes we forget that it can be lonely out there for that missionary. And as I was on the committee and talking to missionaries, veteran missionaries, I really learned too I call it the grandma issue. And Lynn has spoken to that already, but what that really means for a grandparent to be serving in a different country than their grandkids are in, and that certainly is an area for prayer. That's a real need that's there. But back to being involved is God works in the heart of a sender, just as he works in the heart of a goer, and lays things on your heart that you got to respond to. And I don't think God asks us to do anything that he will not equip us to do.
Mm-hmm.
If he calls us, he'll equip us. And it's whatever aspect, whatever part of this it is. If it's only prayer, he equips us with prayer. He allows us. So there's a joy in being involved in missions, a true joy. And to see answers to prayer, that's true joy.
And there's a very real financial component as well, right? We sometimes say the water of life is free, but the pipes to get it to you, those cost. And it takes people saying, I will make that investment as a sender so that others can go and take this good news of the gospel to people who have not yet heard, like Rob was saying, to seek and save the lost.
Yeah, I think one thing I learned early on is God doesn't need my money to do something. He doesn't need it. He owns the cattle on 1,000 hills. Psalms 50, I think it is. The truth is that he invites us to participate. And if we're invited and we obey, then we receive a blessing of the joy of giving. The joy of seeing that ministry grow, or whatever he's asked us to do. There's a real, true, deep joy in that. And if we procrastinate and forget about it, God still meets that need.
Hmm.
It doesn't go unmet. And so I see it as an invitation to join in the work what God's doing.
Yeah, I love that. God doesn't need our money, but he invites us into participation. Yeah, that's huge. Let me go one final question here, kind of rapid fire. Each of you has testified to the faithfulness of God in various ways in your own life, the lives of your family, lives of friends, other missionaries throughout. And we know that looking back on what God has done is what actually inspires to take a step of faith moving forward. And I think I can say this just based on the things you've shared here, that, each of you are not, you're not in your 20s anymore. You've been at this for a little while. You've seen the Lord work.
In my mind, I'm in my 20s.
Yeah. Well, that's, there's a lot of maybe politically incorrect jokes that I could make about that. I'm gonna choose to let those go for now. But as you look back on God's faithfulness, even in the third or fourth quarter of your lives, how does looking back on his faithfulness today inspire you to take bold steps for his kingdom moving forward? What does that look like in your lives right now?
I think the answer is in the question, right? The answer is in the question. By looking back, we can see how God has been faithful. He's provided at every way. He's opened doors. Never would I have thought that I would be teaching English at this age, right, to 12-year-olds. But there's a great demand in Brazil, and it's a door God's opened. And so it's a door we're using to pull the students in and their parents with them to church events. And just to see our availability, God uses the availability you have. But when you see what he's done in the past, he's been there, eternity past. He's been there for my past. He's going to be there in the future, and he is faithful to those of us, to those that want to bring him glory, and we're just so thankful for that.
Yeah. How would others answer that? How does seeing God's faithfulness in the past inspire you to step out in faith moving forward?
I mean, now that we aren't in our 20s, we have a lot of life behind us to look at and see. So that's one of the advantages, actually, of having had life experiences and see how God has been there through everything. So we know and we have confidence he will continue.
But Lynn, I would say too, right now, you are living more fully than a lot of people ever live in their entire life. It's not just looking back and seeing this was in the past. Like, you are actively pressing forward, saying, not that I've obtained it, but I'm striving to see Christ and magnify him in every aspect of my life.
We don't want to stop serving, and doesn't matter our age.
Yeah. Well, I mean, in quite literal terms, age is just a number.
It is just a number.
Yeah.
Well, to say a cliche, Steve Farrar has a book, Finish Strong, and Piper has a book, Don't Waste Your Life.
Yeah.
Right? Those are great encouragements. That's a word, yeah, encouragements to don't sit and stew, as Pastor Tyler would say, in a pew, right? Be active with your life. How God can use us even now. So
I was thinking about we were talking about as you get older, you have a tendency to want to kind of dwell in the past a little bit. Honestly, the good old days, and talk about that. But if you think about it, one of the key principles in navigation is that you have to know where you've been in order to know where you're going, right?
Yeah.
So if you're in the backseat of a car and you're asleep and somebody wakes up and hands you the wheel, you wake up and it's your turn to drive, you don't even know where to go, right?
Right.
So I would say that having been through good times and bad times in the past, it really gives me strength to go forward because I know where I've been.
Yeah.
And I know that God's brought me through that. And it also helps me in my direction going forward because as I can glance back over my shoulder, But, as it says in Psalms, trust in the Lord with all your heart, lean not on your own understanding, in all your ways acknowledge him. So in my past, I'm acknowledging that he was sovereign in all of that, and he will make your path straight.
That's right.
So at this age, it helps me not to waste time because I know what the mission is, and I know he's seen me through it in the past.
Yeah, that's so good there. Look, glancing back is important.
That's
you
correct.
need to do it.
That's correct.
It's just not to go back there. It's to go somewhere else. And
Yeah,
you've got
if
to
you
let it
spend
push
all
you
your
forward.
time looking backwards, you're going to run into the tree. Yeah.
Moral of the story today, don't run into the tree.
That's right.
Jim, how would you answer this question? How does seeing God's faithfulness in the past inspire you to step out in faith moving forward?
Well, God hasn't changed. He's demonstrated his faithfulness all through Scripture, and he certainly today has shown his faithfulness, answering prayer, directing us. And it's an encouragement to know that not only is he doing it today, but he promises to continue doing it through all eternity.
That's right.
And so knowing that we're on the right team and we have the right leadership is really inspirational. And it's easy to say that when things are looking good, but I have to be reminded at times myself that God knows all about it, and he's directing us and obey him.
Yeah, that's right. Guys, thanks for making time to be here today. I've enjoyed remembering some of these things together. I love each of you, and it's been a lot of fun to sit and talk about it. Thanks for creating some space and for being here, whether in person or on Zoom. It's been a lot of fun, and I trust our listeners will benefit from it. To all of you who have been listening, we just want to say thank you for joining us for Parkside at 175. And until next time, keep looking for the faithfulness of God.